Now, there will be a lot of noise behind us, but we certainly want to talk about that speech that we just heard from Pierre Poilievre. And to do that, we're joined by two people who you know very well from Primetime Politics, two political observers, Sean Murphy, senior consultant at Earnscliffe Strategies, who spent nearly a decade on Parliament Hill as a senior Conservative Party staffer in both government and opposition. Kim Wright, principal with Wright Strategies, who worked in politics at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels for more than 30 years, including for several years as an NDP staffer at Queen's Park. Now, you'll notice that we don't have a Liberal political observer with us today, and that's because there were and are no Liberal observers here taking part in this convention that were able to speak with us. The Liberal Party says that they were not invited to send observers, so we will continue our discussion, although we should note that a little later on you will hear from Liberal Cabinet Minister Pablo Rodriguez. He is holding a scrum outside the convention center. We'll bring that to you a little later here in CPAC. But let's bring in Sean, let's bring in Kim. First and foremost, and I'll begin with you, Kim, because you have less affiliation with the party. What do you make of that speech that we just heard from Pierre Poilievre?
Yeah, I'll say this. I'm not sure there's any red meat left in the entire province of Quebec because it was all up on that speech and that stage. It was entirely designed to rally his base. There was nothing that felt authentic about it. It felt forced. It felt contrived. You know, it's been interesting to watch this evolution of Pierre Poilievre, and we'll talk about this in a bit. But everything feels like, from the common sense slogan, which is a throwback to the Mike Harris Ontario government. He's, walking around in his tours wearing Aaron O'Toole's old shirts. He's got Andrew Scheer's old resume. He talks about common people and their festivals. There is nothing that is authentic about what we keep seeing. And the reality is the policies he keeps talking about are ones he didn't implement when he was a Harper minister. He talked about how cryptocurrency most recently was going to be the thing that saved us all from inflation, and we saw how that worked. So there's a lot of things that if he's trying to introduce himself to Canadians, I don't think that this is a speech that hit the mark. Okay.
Sean, what do you make? I take it, because you're not the only Conservative in the room, you have a very different take on that.
Yeah, I not surprisingly, I didn't quite see it the same way as Kim. I thought, Pierre has been in politics for a long time. He's given a lot of speeches, and I think without a doubt, given the situation we're in right now, this is the most important speech of his career to date, and I'd say he knocked it out of the park. Kim said there was a lot of red meat on there, but I think there was a lot of meat on the bone that was not just red meat. He did have a lot of his big lines that he gets, the applause lines that he uses, some of the punchy phrases he's been developing and using over the years. But he's also shifted into Professor Pierre at times when he talked about how inflation is caused by government decisions and some of the reasons why housing is so unaffordable for Canadians right now. So for people who aren't decided partisans, like most of the people in this room, people who are seeing this for the first time really got to see somebody who is drilled down on the issues and is ready to make the change that so many people are looking for.
Yeah, Kim, I hear what you're saying, but without a doubt, though, it seems the majority of Canadians agree with Sean. This speech aside, you look at the polling numbers, and there is resonance that is helping the Conservative Party right now, building a huge lead over the Liberals, over the NDP. In fact, the NDP has flatlined, according to what we've been speaking with pollsters about over this last 24 hours or so. But Canadians seem to be agreeing with the message that Pierre Poilievre is putting out there for the Conservatives to be enjoying such a lead in the polls.
So what's interesting is one of the people I saw in the front row of this speech is former leader Andrew Scheer, who's sitting in the front row and no longer leader, because he was well in advance of the last campaign. People were liking what he was talking about. And then he started nominating a bunch of candidates that didn't sit with Canadians' values. I believe 80 or so members of his candidate list were pro-life candidates. You started to see, even in the Aaron O'Toole years, you had policy resolutions that weren't with Canadians' values. It was, we're not sure that climate change is real and we're sure as heck not going to do anything about it. That's not where Canadians were. Pierre Poilievre talks about the gatekeepers and we need to build housing, and God knows, anybody who sees my social media knows that I hate NIMBYs more than anyone on earth. However, there is nothing in this policy resolution book here at this convention that's going to build a lick of new housing. He invoked tonight in his speech the famous five, which is the women who brought forward the persons case. And he talked about women's rights. And there's a whole bunch of resolutions here and a whole lot of conversations that are about body autonomy, except for anyone with a uterus. So there are some disconnects, so it's great that he's out in front right now, but he's going to have some explaining to do when we start to see policies, when we start to see resolutions, when we start to see candidates, and that's not so easily flatlined away.
Okay, we're going to have to keep an eye on that because the plenary happens tomorrow, so we're going to keep an eye on that. But, I will pick up on a point that Kim says there, because Aaron O'Toole, Andrew Scheer, they essentially suffered because of the social conservative wing of the party, in that the Liberals use that as a wedge issue for undecided Canadians. So what do you say about that wing of the party and what Pierre Poilievre has been able to do here to create a message that not only unites Conservatives, but perhaps unites non-Conservatives to vote for him next time around?
Well, I think you would, again, I don't think you'd be surprised to see that I don't entirely agree with Kim on that. I think the polls are showing that Pierre is resonating with Canadians with his message, and it's part of the reason he's going across the country, city to city, meeting people in big rallies, some not nearly as big as this, but he's sticking around and he's meeting every single person who goes to those rallies and shaking all of their hands, and he's hearing their stories and he's bringing those stories forward to places like this and to the policy conventions, and he's connecting with Canadians in a way that other leaders haven't been able to in the past, and he's connecting with Canadians in a way that...
But does that mean that the social conservative debate is over, that they can keep narrowcasting on the few issues that he's talking about so far, cutting the tax, the carbon tax, affordability? Can he stay on that message for 2 years? Because that's what we're looking at perhaps until the next election.
I think if you look at his speech today, you'll see that he's going to be entirely focused on that, on affordability issues, on housing issues, on public safety issues, on issues of foreign interference. And there will be some other things that crop up, but I think there are forces within the party, sure, there are voices in the party that are going to want to bring those things up, but I think more often than not, you're going to hear those issues come up from his opponents and not from people within the tent, and certainly not from himself. I think he's focused on what Canadians are focused on, and that's their paychecks and their housing situation.
Okay, so listen, I've got less than a minute, but I'm going to give this one to you, Kim, because I'm wondering how the Liberals and the NDP might respond to this, because, again, a sizable lead, and I understand what you're saying. It was still a very strong speech from Pierre Poilievre tonight.
Look, if he hadn't had a strong speech after, an hour? First of all, the man could use an editor, but let's park that for a second. The reality is what we've seen from Pierre Poilievre is a bit of blue-collar cosplay. He's trying to look like he's one of these guys, but then he says phrases like, I was out with the common people at their festivals. The lack of authenticity is something that he's going to have to really figure out of who he is and what he wants to portray. And what we're also going to see from the other parties in the House, including Jagmeet and the New Democrats, is what are the solutions? It's not enough to say catchy slogans and have them printed on pretty banners, but you actually have to walk the talk. And when Pierre Poilievre was minister, he left those veterans out to dry. The PTSD, the trauma that these veterans were facing was completely ignored by the Conservative government that he was part of, and he's going to have to answer for that.
Okay, I'm sorry I'm out of time. The speech did run a little bit longer, but Sean Murphy, Kim Wright, thank you very much for the time.